If you haven't had this happen yet, there's a good chance that someone is going to ask to bring their service animal or emotional support animal to your pet-free cabin. So do you have to accept, and what are the things that you have to look out for when dealing with this type of animal request? What's up, guys? Welcome back to Airbnb ABCs. This is a pain in the butt situation when you have a pet-free cabin and someone wants to bring an emotional support animal or a service animal to your cabin, your property, your beach house, whatever. The thing is that they're not necessarily really pets, but they come with a lot of the same issues as pets have, and you might be pet-free for a bunch of different reasons that are really your business and your business alone. But the big ones are usually wear and tear and allergen concerns for people that have pet allergies, like, for example, my wife has some pretty legit pet allergies. Animal waste, food, things that need to be picked up, especially, that stuff kind of thing gets kicked underneath refrigerators and dishwashers and tends to bring mice into cabins, especially if you're in the Smokies, where mice are, a big deal if you don't keep them out and you don't keep things put away. But when we're dealing with service animals and emotional support animals, we're starting to get into areas that deal with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're starting to get in with discrimination issues, possibly. And so today what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about those things, how I deal with them, and we're going to look at Airbnb and VRBO's actual policies on how to address these, because they do spell it out very clearly in their accessibility policies. And then I will tell you how I personally handle these requests. In the infrequent event that they do. It's not a terribly common thing. I think most folks who legitimately have emotional support animals and service animals usually seek out pet-friendly places, but when you do get these things, you will want to know how to deal with them, and so I'll show you how I have dealt with them over the last 2 or 3 years of hosting on Airbnb and VRBO. So all I ask you all to do is to like this video to help it out in the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe down below if you have not yet subscribed, if you're new here, if this is your first time, and let's get into how the rules for these animals and how I handle it. Let's start off real quick and talk about just pets in general, because a lot of folks travel with their pets. I see them in more and more places. People are taking them to places like Home Depot and Lowe's and the grocery store, and I'm not necessarily on board with that, but it's what people are doing. And when you're in the hospitality business, the travel business, it is something that you have to keep in mind, especially because it does cost a lot of money to board a pet if someone is going away for, a week or more. And so, pet-friendly cabins do have a certain appeal to some folks. Now, the biggest thing is that you can put yourself into that niche within the travel community that allows pets, and you are going to get bookings specifically because you allow pets. The pet fees that you're allowed to charge, just regular pet owners bringing a non-service animal especially, those can definitely boost your revenue. It will cost you more probably on your cleaning side, but you can make up for that in higher cleaning fees for pets and then just pet service fees. Pets are usually extremely well behaved if folks are willing to travel with them. The majority of people out there, although you don't see this on an everyday basis, typically have the self-awareness that if they're going to be traveling with their pet, it needs to be well behaved, needs to be housebroken, not tear things up. And so in general, I found in talking with other people in owners groups, the pets are generally well behaved. And so that's just something to think about if you have a cabin now that is not pet friendly, but maybe your bookings are down, or you have a property that maybe isn't as desirable as the other properties, like you have a mainly drywall place in the Smokies where people are looking for cabins, or if you have a beach type of rental that is farther away from the beach and you're looking to boost your bookings, becoming pet friendly is something that you may want to think about. But let's get into service animals. These are, in my opinion, the most legit out of anything that we're going to talk about today. These are usually animals that are trained to perform a specific task in service to a human that has some sort of disability of some sort. These are usually your guide dogs. You'll see them for folks that are blind. There are seizure detection dogs. There are all sorts of different services that dogs typically, you very rarely hear, I don't think I've ever heard of a service cat, but that dogs provide to folks for them to live their lives in a normal fashion. Now, the biggest thing with this is that some folks will come up with these certificates that say this is a registered service dog. And for the most part, there is no registry that is recognized by the Americans with Disability Acts or the judicial department, as far as my Googling has been able to lead me to. And fake certificates are extremely easy to get. Just type in service dog certificate free online. You can get them tomorrow if you want. So people can fake these, and it happens all the time, and it's kind of hard to weed through any of these requests. Now, service dogs, legit service animals, are usually very well behaved. These dogs have gone through intensive trainings that teach them how to recognize like I said, seizures in humans. I'm sure they have low blood sugar. They probably have things for all sorts of stuff, and especially guide dogs. They're on point, and they are very well trained. These are like the Navy SEALs of the pet world, and so they're going to be very well behaved. They're not going to bark randomly and cause problems. They're not going to chew things up. They're going to be housebroken, and just extremely good animals. So what I want to do is look at the Airbnb rules that they set out. And when you're looking at the Airbnb rules, the VRBO rules are essentially the same, because we're basically looking at ADA requirements and legal requirements. And to be honest with you, Airbnb's policies go far deeper and far more into detail than VRBO's. And so if it says it in Airbnb, that is what is also going to apply to your VRBO listings. So when we're looking here at Airbnb service animal requirements, their rules, a lot of this just follows what the law is. And in general, you're not going to be able to decline someone who has a service animal from staying in your place, even if you are not pet friendly. But their stuff here says that a service animal is a dog or a miniature horse, and I don't think I've ever seen a service miniature horse, but it's on here, so I'm sure it's out there somewhere, that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. And again, this is like, they're trained to do a specific thing and help that person out with life. What we allow is that guests are allowed to be accompanied by service animals during a stay or experience that are not required to disclose the presence of a service animal before booking. A host may qualify for an exemption in certain circumstances, for instance, if the service animal directly threatens their health or safety. And I'm going to tell you guys that probably nothing that you take to Airbnb is going to be accepted as an exemption just in general. There may be some very, very specific things, but their likelihood of them accepting that exemption is probably really low. And the biggest thing to take away here is, guys, is that they do not have to tell you beforehand that they have a service animal or that they are bringing it. But the one thing that I found is that folks with service animals are very aware of maybe your uncomfortability with it, and folks usually go ahead and disclose this up front every time. I've never had anyone sneak a pet in that was a service animal. These people are usually very upfront. So the hosts are allowed to ask for only the following things about a guest need for a service animal. And this is whether the guest requires their service animal because of a disability, and what work or task the animal has been trained to perform. In general, you can't ask anything else outside of those things, that, such as what your disability necessarily is, how you got it, but just whether or not the animal is needed because of a disability and the task that the animal has been trained to perform. If it is a service animal, and if they say so, you pretty much have to take them at their word, because again, there is very little official documentation to back this up. But what they don't allow is for you to refuse a reservation, charge pet fees or any additional fees, apply any differential treatment than you would a guest without a service animal, use any discriminatory language, or hold guests to a different set of rules. Now, there are rules for the guest that has the service animal, and in general, again, if it's a legit trained service animal, you're not going to have any problems with these, because these dogs are extremely well behaved. The guest animal must not be out of control. It must not be unhousebroken, meaning it has to be housebroken. It cannot be left alone at the listing without prior approval from the host, and we're going to get into that in how I deal with these requests. And they are only allowed into areas that are considered unauthorized to the guest. And what they're saying is they cannot be in those. It's kind of a backwards way of saying those things. They're allowed to be in a public space without being harnessed, leashed, or tethered, or not under the guest control. And that is, again, kind of a backwards way of saying that they are not allowed to essentially be out of control, running around, untethered, or in any way not under the guest control. Now, the other type of animal that you're going to come in contact with is the emotional support animal. And these are completely different than a legitimately trained service animal. These are not trained for any specific task that helps out their human handler with their everyday life. And so they are different rules for these type of animals. These animals provide companionship and help assist with various other mental issues, but in general, they can basically just be pets. And we're just going to dive right into the Airbnb rules on this because they are the ones that are going to give us the most guidance on things. Airbnb says that an emotional support animal is an animal that can provide companionship, relieves loneliness, help with depression, anxiety, or certain phobias, but is not required to have specific training to perform tasks that assist people with disabilities. And so what Airbnb allows, and this is going to go over onto VRBO as well, is unless the reservation or is a stay in New York or California or any other location where applicable law prohibits it, hosts may charge pet fees for a guest who is traveling with an emotional support animal, and hosts are allowed to decline the presence of an emotional support animal from a stay or from an experience. Where I rent in the Smoky Mountains, you can decline for emotional support animals. Now, if they have a problem with that and they take it up to Airbnb, you are going to have to explain yourself, and you may not get a customer service representative that is familiar with this. So if you guys are watching this, bookmark this under their accessibility policy so that you have a leg to stand on if you decline an emotional support animal and they refer you to, or they report you to Airbnb. For jurisdictions where hosts are required to accept emotional support animals, the things are basically the same as the service animal stuff. So if you're in New York, California, or anywhere else that requires you to accept emotional support animals, you cannot charge a pet fee, decline a guest, or apply different rules, treatment, or behavior to a guest traveling with a emotional support animal. And you can ask for information or documentation about a guest emotional support animal beyond the questions outlined for service animals. So basically, the service animal requirements become the requirements for your emotional support animals. For jurisdictions where hosts are required to accept emotional support animals, the guest requirements are essentially exactly the same as service animals. So in those areas like New York, California, in other places where I'm actually not sure where there's any place other than New York and California, the service animal and the emotional support animal basically become one and the same. So in general, in most jurisdictions, you can deny folks to stay at your pet-free cabins if they have an emotional support animal. But the one thing that I want you guys to be aware of is that then usually if they are trying to bring this animal, regardless of what your rules are, they will say, oh, it's not an emotional support animal, it is actually a service animal, and there is very little way for you to verify that in any case, and you sort of have to just go forth with it as it is a service animal. When I receive requests for any of these things, service animals, pets, emotional support animals, if I am required to take them, if it is a service animal, and I do know that there are things where people have to have these animals to get through their life. Like, for example, if they're blind, they have a seeing eye dog. I understand that. What I tell them is that we are a pet-free cabin, but we would be happy to accommodate them with their service animal. And then what I do is I lay out Airbnb's own rules back to them, that the animal has to be housebroken, that the waste has to be picked up, that they have to be on good behavior, and that they can never be left alone in the cabin unattended. And this is usually where it gets them if this is some sort of BS service animal request, because those folks that want to bring their pet in as a service animal and it's not actually a service animal, they do not want to be bothered with them usually going out and seeing the sights and doing all the things all day long. So they usually want to leave them in the cabin. So usually that thing where they have to be well behaved and can never be left alone in the cabin ends up going against really what they want to do with their stay. And so the last thing that I'll tell them is that although we would be happy to accommodate them, with these restrictions that Airbnb lays out, you may be more comfortable just renting a pet-friendly cabin that is not going to have any of these rules and that you are able to do whatever you want with. And so that's how we deal with any sort of request for service animal or emotional support animal, or anyone just generally wanting to bring a pet to our pet-free cabins. If you guys want to see more on how we manage our Airbnb rentals, the types of cabins that we buy, how we manage them from afar, and all the trials and tribulations of running an Airbnb and VRBO short-term rental business, I want you to click on the links that are in the corners here. They are going to give you videos on all that and tours of the cabins that we buy so that you can see the types of cabins that we buy in the prime areas that are the best possible cabins to rent to get you the best returns possible. If you guys haven't yet, subscribe down below, hit the like button to help this video out in the YouTube algorithm. I appreciate you guys watching today, and I'll see you in the next one.